The Capitol hearing room was packed wall to wall, the kind of setting where history often unfolds without warning. Cameras lined the back wall, journalists filled every seat, and the hum of whispered conversations created a nervous tension in the air. The spotlight wasn't just on the policy being debated that day, it was on the personalities in the room, and everyone knew it. At the center of the panel sat Representative Adam Schiff, the longtime Democrat from California, polished as ever in his dark suit and striped tie. Schiff leaned back in his chair, exuding the confidence of a man who had weathered countless political storms. His smirk widened as he turned his attention toward Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who had been invited to testify on issues of state authority and federal overreach. Schiff adjusted his microphone and let out a faint chuckle that carried across the room. "Governor," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "it's always interesting to hear Texas lecture the rest of the country about leadership." He paused, giving the cameras just enough time to catch the faint roll of his eyes. "But tell me, do you really think running a state by clinging to outdated ideas makes you the model for America's future?" The jab landed, sparking laughter from a few in the audience. Schiff leaned back, clearly enjoying himself, as if he had delivered the knockout punch early. The smirk stayed fixed on his face, his hands folded neatly on the table like a professor waiting for a student to stumble over the answer. Abbott, however, didn't flinch. He sat calmly in his wheelchair, hands folded, eyes steady on Schiff. There was no visible anger, no sudden rush to fire back. Instead, Abbott's expression carried the quiet determination of someone who had faced harder battles than a smirking congressman in a hearing room. He adjusted his microphone with deliberate calm, the room holding its collective breath as it waited to see if he would respond, or let Schiff's mockery stand unanswered. The tension was thick, every eye fixed on Abbott, every camera trained on his face. And though he hadn't said a word yet, it was already clear, this was no ordinary exchange. Something bigger was about to happen. Abbott leaned slightly forward, his calm presence suddenly commanding the room. The smirk on Schiff's face still lingered, but it was fading fast as Abbott's words began to roll out, measured, deliberate, and heavy with conviction. "Congressman," Abbott said, his voice even but sharp enough to cut through the buzzing tension, "you can laugh all you want at Texas, but let me remind you, when Washington fails, it's Texas that steps up." The murmurs in the audience swelled. Schiff blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct counterpunch. Abbott didn't pause, he pressed forward, his gaze locked on Schiff like a seasoned trial lawyer dismantling a weak argument. "You talk about outdated ideas," Abbott continued, his Texas drawl steady but firm. "But the truth is, our so-called outdated ideas are the very ones that keep food on America's tables, energy flowing through its pipelines, and jobs alive when politicians in Washington can't see past the next press conference." A few people in the gallery clapped softly before being shushed. Schiff's smirk had completely disappeared now. He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping the desk in front of him as Abbott's words continued to land. "And let me make this clear," Abbott added, leaning in slightly, "you don't define leadership by mocking people or dismissing their challenges. You define leadership by showing up for the people who need you, by standing your ground when others fold, and by keeping your word when it matters most. That's what we do in Texas." The room was silent, hanging on every word. Schiff forced a smile, but it looked thin and fragile, a far cry from the confident chuckle that had started this exchange. Abbott then gave the faintest of smiles, a calm assurance that he hadn't just defended himself, he had shifted the balance of the entire room. And though Schiff tried to look composed, everyone watching could see it. The congressman who laughed a little too loudly had just been silenced by a governor who didn't need to raise his voice to take control. Adam Schiff shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie as if that small gesture could restore his composure. The smirk that had once seemed so effortless now looked forced, and for the first time that afternoon, his confidence wavered. Cameras zoomed in on his face, catching the tension in his jaw and the faint tap of his fingers against the desk. "Governor Abbott," Schiff began, his tone a little sharper now, "it's easy to boast when you're not the one making national policy. Texas might pride itself on being independent, but independence doesn't solve the bigger picture. You don't run a country, you run a state. And sometimes, he paused, narrowing his eyes for emphasis, that state acts like it's above the law. The remark was intended as a slap, an attempt to put Abbott back in his place. A few murmurs rippled through the room, mostly from Schiff's allies seated behind him. But the impact fell flat. Instead of cutting Abbott down, the words only highlighted Schiff's growing frustration. Abbott remained unshaken. He adjusted his papers with deliberate calm, waiting for the noise to subside before leaning toward the microphone once more. His voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. "Congressman," Abbott replied, "you're right about one thing. I don't run the whole country. But what Texas does often keeps the whole country running." The audience stirred again, leaning in as Abbott's quiet confidence began to dominate the room. He continued, "When Washington hesitates, Texas leads. Whether it's securing the border, protecting energy production, or defending the freedoms guaranteed in our Constitution, Texas has never waited for permission to do what's right for its people." A few claps echoed through the gallery, growing louder until even those who had been silent joined in. Schiff pursed his lips, his attempt at control slipping further as the crowd reacted. "And let me remind you," Abbott added, his gaze steady, "mockery is not a policy. Smirks don't pay bills. Insults don't put food on the table. Leadership is about results, and results are what Texas delivers." The clapping grew into a steady rhythm, filling the chamber with a low roar. Schiff looked momentarily frozen, his earlier laughter now a memory overshadowed by Abbott's words. The tide was turning, and everyone in the room could feel it. Schiff wasn't ready to concede the moment. He straightened in his chair, drawing in a sharp breath as if to reclaim the authority that had slipped through his fingers. His voice rose louder this time, more performative than persuasive, directed not at Abbott but at the cameras lining the back wall. "Governor Abbott," Schiff said with a practiced scoff, "what you call leadership, many of us call recklessness. Texas acts like a nation unto itself, flaunting the law when it suits you. That's not bravery, that's arrogance. And frankly, it's dangerous." He emphasized the word dangerous with a sharp jab of his finger, clearly aiming to land a headline-worthy blow. A few allies behind him nodded, whispering approval, as though the narrative had been reclaimed. Schiff allowed himself another faint chuckle, shaking his head as if Abbott were some amusing footnote rather than a governor of one of America's largest states. But the smirk lasted only seconds. Abbott, calm as ever, leaned into his microphone again. His voice didn't need to rise, it cut sharper precisely because it was steady. "Congressman, there's nothing dangerous about standing up for the people who trust you to fight for them," Abbott replied, his tone almost surgical. "What's dangerous is politicians who sneer at those struggles while hiding behind DC talking points." The audience stirred. Schiff blinked, caught off guard by the blunt precision. Abbott pressed forward, his words slow and deliberate. "You laugh at Texas for defending its borders, for protecting its energy workers, for making sure parents, not bureaucrats, have a say in their children's education. But I'll tell you this, the only thing reckless would be abandoning those responsibilities for the sake of applause in Washington." A ripple of applause spread through the room, growing into a steady wave. Schiff looked down at his papers, flipping them nervously though it was clear he wasn't reading anything. Abbott, sensing the shift, added the final twist of the knife. "Congressman, you can mock me, you can mock Texas, but every insult only proves what I've said all along. Washington doesn't understand the people it claims to serve. And maybe that's why Washington keeps failing them." The room erupted. Schiff froze, his earlier laughter now replaced with the stiff stillness of a man who realized he had just been outplayed. Abbott hadn't just defended himself, he had taken Schiff's weapon and turned it into his own victory. The air in the hearing room shifted. The once confident murmurs behind Schiff had grown faint, replaced by the steady clap of hands that refused to die down after Abbott's last line. Journalists leaned forward, their fingers flying across keyboards as cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the governor's unflinching calm against the congressman's stiff unease. Schiff tried to mask it, flipping his papers and clearing his throat, but the attempt only amplified the silence around him. His earlier laughter, once bold enough to ripple through the chamber, now felt like a ghost hanging in the air, a reminder of a miscalculation. He looked up briefly, forcing a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted quickly toward the cameras, then back to his desk, as though searching for an escape route. Meanwhile, Abbott remained steady. He hadn't raised his voice once, yet his presence filled the entire room. Reporters exchanged glances. This wasn't just a heated exchange. It was a defining moment, a clash that would dominate headlines before the day was over. One journalist whispered to another, "That wasn't just a rebuttal." Abbott owned the room. The comment echoed what many were thinking. Schiff had entered with a smirk, but now Abbott sat in control, his calm confidence painting Schiff's mockery as shallow and unserious. Even some of Schiff's allies appeared uneasy. A few avoided eye contact with the cameras altogether, knowing full well how the footage would play across evening broadcasts and social media. On Twitter, hashtags were already forming, #AbbottClapback, #SchiffShutdown, spreading like wildfire as clips of the exchange leaked out from attendees in the gallery. Abbott didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Instead, he leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the silence hang heavy, as if to say the moment spoke for itself. Schiff shifted once more, clearly realizing that the fight he had started wasn't one he could finish. It was no longer a question of who had won the exchange, the entire room already knew. By the time the hearing adjourned, the battle between Schiff and Greg Abbott had already escaped the walls of Congress. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps, microphones flashing, cameras rolling. The chatter wasn't about the policy on the table anymore, it was about the moment. The laughter, the clapback, and the way Abbott had turned the room upside down without ever raising his voice. Cable news networks wasted no time. CNN replayed the exchange with commentary that Schiff had overplayed his hand. Fox News framed it as Abbott schooling Washington elites. MSNBC analysts nervously debated whether Schiff's mockery had crossed a line, inadvertently giving Abbott the upper ground. By evening, every major network was running clips side by side, Schiff's smirk dissolving into silence as Abbott delivered his calm but devastating response. Social media, however, was where the fire truly spread. Twitter exploded with hashtags, #AbbottClapback, #SchiffShutdown, and #TexasTakesOver. TikTok edits popped up within hours, snappy cuts of Schiff laughing, followed by Abbott's "smirks don't pay bills" line, all set to dramatic background music. One clip hit 1 million views in under 3 hours. Facebook and Instagram reels were filled with captions like, "When you laugh at Texas, don't be surprised when Texas laughs last." Reddit threads debated whether this was Schiff's worst political misstep yet, with one top comment reading, "Abbott just taught a masterclass in staying calm under fire." Even late-night shows couldn't resist. Some hosts tried to frame it as a comedy moment, but the punchlines fell flat compared to the raw authenticity of Abbott's response. The consensus was clear, Schiff had wanted a viral laugh line, but Abbott had walked away with the viral victory. Inside Schiff's office, aides scrambled, drafting statements and prepping damage control. But the optics were undeniable, Abbott had won the narrative, and no spin could erase the video clips replaying endlessly across America's screens. Inside Schiff's office, the mood was grim. Aides huddled around glowing laptop screens replaying the now infamous exchange on loop. Each viewing seemed worse than the last. Schiff rubbed his temples as staffers tossed out ideas for damage control, a press release dismissing Abbott's remarks as political theater, a sympathetic interview with friendly media outlets, even a pivot to another hot-button issue. But none of it felt strong enough to erase the image that had gone viral, the congressman laughing, then folding under Abbott's quiet but devastating rebuttal. "Congressman, we need to get ahead of this," one aide insisted. "If we don't, it'll define you for weeks." Schiff's response was curt. "We'll push back," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual authority. Meanwhile, in Texas, Abbott's office buzzed with energy. Calls poured in from supporters across the state and beyond, praising his composure. Local news stations replayed the clips with glowing commentary. "Abbott stands tall in Washington," one anchor declared. Conservative commentators praised him for embodying Texan grit, while even some independent voices admitted he had outmaneuvered Schiff on a national stage. Abbott himself remained understated, but his team recognized the political gold in front of them. Social media posts from his office highlighted key lines. "Smirks don't pay bills" became a rallying cry, printed on graphics and shared thousands of times. Donors reached out, asking how they could support his next campaign push. Grassroots groups pledged to organize watch parties for Abbott's next appearance. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Schiff, scrambling to minimize the damage, while Abbott rode a wave of momentum that showed no signs of slowing. What began as an attempt to belittle Texas's governor had transformed into a national moment of vindication for him, and a warning for anyone else who thought mocking Greg Abbott would be an easy win. In the days that followed, the clash between Greg Abbott and Adam Schiff became more than just a viral clip. It turned into a talking point across Washington's power corridors. Inside congressional offices, aides whispered about it like it was a prize fight. "Did you see Abbott take Schiff apart?" one staffer muttered in a Capitol hallway. Even those who didn't typically follow Texas politics now recognized Abbott's name with fresh weight. On cable news, panels dissected the exchange endlessly. Some liberal pundits tried to soften Schiff's stumble, arguing that mockery was part of political theater. But even their tone carried unease, because the video didn't lie. Abbott had remained calm, collected, and razor-sharp, while Schiff looked rattled. Meanwhile, conservative voices hammered the narrative. Washington elites had underestimated a Texas governor, and Texas had struck back. Outside of Washington, the response was even more visceral. Town hall meetings in Texas opened with applause lines referencing Abbott's "Smirks don't pay bills" remark. Farmers, veterans, and small business owners repeated it like a mantra, proud to see their governor standing toe-to-toe with one of D.C.'s most recognizable Democrats. Pollsters noticed an immediate spike in Abbott's visibility. Online surveys showed his name recognition jumping nationally, especially among independents who admired his composure under fire. One analysis put it bluntly: Abbott may have just turned Schiff's laughter into the biggest unforced error of his career. Even late-night comedy couldn't escape the moment. Monologues replayed Schiff's smirk dissolving into silence, but the laughter in studio audiences came less at Abbott and more at Schiff's awkward retreat. The irony was thick. Schiff had wanted to belittle Abbott, but the ridicule now belonged to him. In political circles, a new question quietly emerged. Had Schiff accidentally elevated Greg Abbott from being a Texas figurehead to a national heavyweight? The clash had been a spark, and now the fire was spreading far beyond the chamber where it began. Back in Texas, Abbott's team wasted no time capitalizing on the wave of attention. What had started as a single viral exchange was now a rallying point, and Abbott understood perfectly how to turn that spark into fuel. At his first public appearance after the clash, the energy was palpable. A small-town auditorium overflowed with supporters waving flags and holding homemade signs, many of them quoting his now famous line, "Smirks don't pay bills." The phrase had become more than a rebuttal, it was a symbol of defiance against Washington arrogance. Abbott walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He paused, letting the cheers wash over him, then leaned into the microphone with that same steady tone that had silenced Schiff. "Texans don't need lectures from politicians who laugh at their struggles," he said. "What we need is leadership rooted in grit, respect, and results." The crowd roared, their chants of "Abbott! Abbott!" echoing through the hall. Behind the scenes, Abbott's political operation moved swiftly. Fundraising emails framed the clash as proof of Abbott's strength, and donations poured in at record speed. Grassroots organizers launched campaigns under the banner of "Results, not Smirks," rallying volunteers who had never been politically active before. Conservative radio hosts praised Abbott's calm, while even moderate outlets admitted that his composure had resonated with Americans tired of partisan theatrics. Social media amplified it all. Supporters flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok with graphics, memes, and short clips of the exchange, casting Abbott as the man who stood tall while Schiff stumbled. One viral tweet summed it up: Abbott didn't just answer Schiff, he answered every Texan tired of being mocked. In private strategy meetings, Abbott's advisors agreed, this wasn't just a one-off win. It was an opening, a chance to project Abbott beyond Texas, onto the national stage as a voice for calm, principled resistance to Washington elites. And Abbott, with his measured confidence, was more than ready to embrace that role. The rally reached its peak as the chants quieted, leaving a heavy anticipation hanging in the room. Abbott gripped the podium with both hands, his voice steady but carrying the fire of conviction. "Friends," he began, scanning the sea of faces lit by pride and determination, "this moment wasn't about one exchange in Washington. It wasn't about me versus Adam Schiff. It was about something bigger, every Texan, every American, who's tired of being sneered at by politicians who've forgotten what real leadership looks like." The crowd erupted again, but Abbott raised his hand, calling them back to silence. His words grew sharper, stronger. "They laugh at our way of life. They mock our families, our faith, our freedom. But what they don't understand is that Texas, and America, doesn't bow to smirks or insults. We answer with results, with grit, with unity." A roar of "Texas Strong" broke out, rolling through the hall like thunder. Abbott nodded, his gaze fierce yet calm, his tone now lower, almost intimate. "I want every single one of you to remember this: Washington doesn't define us. We define ourselves. Our strength doesn't come from their approval. It comes from the values we live every day: the rancher fixing fence lines before dawn, the mom working 2 jobs to keep her family fed, the soldier who stands guard while the rest of the country sleeps. That's the America I fight for. That's the Texas I will always defend." He paused, letting the words sink deep, before driving the final line: "So if they think a laugh, a smirk, or a headline can stop us, let them try. Because we will rise, we will fight, and we will prove, friends, don't look at what happened today as just another debate." This wasn't Greg Abbott answering one man, it was Texas standing tall against the sneers and the mockery that come from Washington. Adam Schiff started with laughter, but we ended with truth. Because smirks, cheap shots, and empty words don't put food on the table, don't pay a worker's wages, and don't protect a family's way of life. Texas strength, and America's spirit, live in honesty, hard work, and standing shoulder to shoulder with one another. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Because every time they try to tear us down, we rise higher. Texas is not just a state, it's the symbol of grit, courage, and freedom. Washington's laughter fades. But Texas' resolve stands firm. And I promise you this: as long as I have a voice, I will fight for the rancher fixing fences before dawn, for the mother working 2 jobs to provide for her kids, and for the soldier who keeps watch when the rest of the country sleeps. This country does not belong to politicians who mock it, it belongs to the people who build it. And we, the people, will never bow. Texas is here, and Texas will always stand tall.